I've tried to understand a little bit about what's known as Generation Z. I went to college with a generation that was much, much, much younger than me. I do feel that there are certain foundational themes that, even for those who have lived through them, as I did, that don't get quite the accurate representation they deserve. And we are dealing with an issue of hidden history, which means that trying to set the record straight as far as the reality of what happened is structured to make it look like you're hotwiring into a system where the narratives are established. An example of the former concern, the issue of primary issues that are not quite accurately described, pertains to FDR's early death before the end of World War II. Some things went wrong because he was out of the picture. Relations with Russia suffered. The CIA got the upper hand, the OSS Allen Dulles nexus. And the defeated began reasserting their power. He wanted the French out of Indochina because they were allies of the Japanese there. And Lyndon Johnson did not pass the civil rights legislation per se. It was JFK's last act. That was JFK's civil rights legislation. And whatever you may say about Kennedy's culpability in the War of Vietnam, he did not attach a quid pro quo to the civil rights legislation the way LBJ did. He didn't say, you're getting this so that you serve in return, I want your service in Vietnam. It's also ill understood as a foundational issue, the way that Hollywood played a role in the defeat, the way the defeated reasserted their power after the Civil War and reasserted their power after World War II through the Red Scare. Lastly, it's not clearly understood that the community college movement facilitated people who didn't want to be drafted. If you were in college, you were not eligible for the draft. You could, for some people, going to school was a form of draft evasion. And this caused all sorts of peculiar resentments and grudges. It was almost a Mason-Dixon line in a psychological sense. Of course, the movement that I've investigated flipped all the symbols so that you get Dixon and Jefferson Davis and Oliver North, so the North Mason-Dixon lines are all confused. But they're still very symbolic, and it's deeply intentional. It's an index framework from the Veterans Administration. Now, when it comes to Putin, he seems to have known about Gail Bersin. So he's subject to my belief that the people who are in power, who went along with that, should be adjudged under international law. That, of course, isn't the reason why Putin is arraigned. The reason why he was arraigned is because of Ukraine, and that seems to me erroneous. It's a slip knot for the people who went along with Gail Bersin. But what happened is that, see, Putin, I think wrongly, says that Glasnost was an international disaster. I don't think it was. I think it could have gone very well if America was led by leaders who were knowledgeable and in good faith towards Russia. They had been replaced long ago with the premature death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And then, of course, the hatchet job that was done to the Kennedys. Bobby Kennedy attributes the idea of an arc to Khrushchev. So he's more or less on board with the devious tactics of that Gail Burstyn documented. I don't know why he would go along with the authors of the murder of his uncle and father the way he does. He just places it onto the Palestinians, which is sad. Nor do I blame the Soviet Union entirely. There was a man named Reinhard Giesler who questioned AIDS and thought that Fort Detrick should be investigated. Bobby Kennedy is adamant that Fauci and the biolabs have to be brought under control. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I'm not in a position to do anything about it, and I've been abused by bacteriological scientists. First time I remember something creepy was when they gave me scabies on Mount Desert Island. They poisoned me in the mouth and stuff. You're supposed to imagine the smell, whatever. The Sean Penn Putin dialogue machine. God, when he lost his temper over Ukraine and COVID was going on, God knows how that international agreement got arrived at. But what they claim, I think, to each other is that to believe that you can escape genocide when faced with human overpopulation is magical thinking. I strongly detest the way the administration of the universities have abandoned their post at a concept like that. They abandoned their post by legitimizing pornographic genocide during AIDS. It's an outrage. It should have been thoroughly investigated properly. They played, bongo drum missions from African sensibilities about it. It was hilarious to them. Now it's a simple fact. It's not hall wiring in. It's not magical thinking. It may be magical thinking to say that you can escape the life, birth, and death cycle while procreating. That would be magical thinking. There's a certain logic to the fact that we're born to die because we're procreative. There's a certain logic to that. It's a miraculous logic in which we invest our faith and our actions and love for one another and see it as a challenge from God to accept. But it's not magical thinking to say we should be careful with resources. We should be developing poverty programs that reduce child birth necessity because we reduce child mortality. The more people know, the more they have care. We should be distributing resources equitably and learning not to be offensive towards one another. Now, when the Berlin Wall came down, the bizarre intensity of the Red Scare science fiction mindset of the 50s, because this is another issue that isn't properly understood. Bowie was with the science fiction people. He was with the people who made Godzilla and Mothra. He turned the 50s on the 60s. He did a gyration for fascism and rubbed it in the face of the people who believed in community lenience towards freedom of association. Lovemaking was so normal when I was young. Boys just got it together with their girlfriends. So the fears, the blame that came on the 60s from the 50s mindset of the Red Scare and science fiction was suspicious. I mean, I tried to exonerate Ronald Reagan in my heart, long before I saw the evidence against him and saw the ploy of what they call the spinning mirror. Point the finger at you, the idea that offense is your defense. Good offense is the best defense. But these maniacs, if King had been alive, can you imagine the beauty and grace that he would have exhibited at the Berlin Wall coming down? Finally, embrace your brothers in Russia. Finally, we can work together. None of that happened. Bush could barely conceptualize of the idea of a magnanimous word about it. And his team was full of rancor. And all they wanted was a decent interval to adjust to the changes in the Ukraine. The man who was, Yanukovych, was well liked by Russia. He was elected by the Ukraine. People should have supported this motion. It had been preceded by the Velvet Revolution. It wasn't preceded by Prague Spring. It wasn't preceded by the crackdown in Hungary of the 1950s. It was preceded by the Velvet Revolution, when the Russians pulled out of Czechoslovakia. And Czech Republic allowed Slovakia to secede from Czechoslovakia. It was peaceful processes. And the Nazis or the neocons went in with guns blazing, shooting at both sides to get them fighting. And Putin went into the Crimea. People say he should have gone to the Donbass. He should have taken charge of the Russian people in the Ukraine and said, we're going to build a buffer and protect the Russian people. And it has reasons for it. It's nostalgic. And you can't make a case to me. You can make a case to me that Putin, at best, was dishonorably negligent about Gale Burston. That's at best. But you can't make a case for me that he hasn't been reasonable when it comes to the territorial claims of Russia, or his reasons for his special operation. You can't make a case. I know too well what would happen. I abhorred the calamity that was visited on Ukraine. Nobody with any sense is cheering that happened. It's an outrage.